The sterile white walls of the ER seemed to close in on him. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, a harsh reminder that life could shatter in a second. Lucas Granger sat slumped forward on the hard plastic chair, his elbows digging into his knees, his trembling hands covering his face. His son was inside, just 7 years old, his small chest struggling under the weight of machines and tubes. Lucas could still hear the crash in his ears, the screech of tires, the way the world spun before he pulled his boy out of the wreck. His shirt was still stained with blood he hadn't had time to wash away. The smell of smoke clung to him like a cruel shadow. He had always thought he could be strong for his son. After all, Lucas was all he had. But sitting there alone in that hospital hallway, surrounded by strangers rushing past in scrubs and white coats, the weight of everything pressed down until he broke. His shoulders shook violently, his tears staining the calloused hands that had worked construction jobs day and night just to keep food on the table. He had promised his boy Evan that no matter how hard life got, Dad would always make it better. But now, Lucas felt powerless, crushed beneath the kind of fear that only a parent in crisis can understand. Before we go deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, in the power of second chances, and in the strength of compassion between strangers, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel, Nest Journal. Together, we can spread stories that heal. Lucas leaned back against the wall, staring blankly at the ceiling, wishing someone, anyone, would sit beside him. But the waiting room was a blur of strangers consumed with their own emergencies. No familiar faces, no hand to hold. He was utterly invisible, a father swallowed by silence and grief. Then footsteps slowed, a presence lingered. Lucas wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. He turned his head slightly and saw her, a woman poised yet gentle, lowering herself into the chair beside him. She was dressed in an elegant navy coat, her dark hair pulled neatly into a bun straight with silver strands that caught the harsh lights. She didn't look like someone who belonged in the chaos of an ER waiting room. There was something otherworldly about her calmness, like she had come from a different world entirely. But what struck Lucas most wasn't her appearance. It was her eyes. They weren't curious or pitying. They were understanding. Like she knew exactly what it felt like to sit there broken. For a long moment, she said nothing. She simply sat beside him, her presence quiet but steady, anchoring him in a storm he thought he would drown in. Lucas tried to look away, ashamed of his tears. But then her voice broke through the heavy silence. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said softly. Just 7 words, yet they cracked open the dam in Lucas's heart. It startled him because they were exactly the words he hadn't realized he needed. For months, for years even, he had carried everything on his shoulders. Parenthood, bills, long shifts, endless exhaustion. His life had been a grind of survival, and loneliness had been his constant companion. But now here was this stranger telling him that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to endure it all without help. Lucas exhaled sharply, a sob escaping despite his effort to hold it back. He shook his head, muttering that he couldn't afford for anything to happen to his boy, that Evan was all he had left in this world. His wife had passed when Evan was just a toddler, leaving Lucas to figure out fatherhood in the midst of grief and financial ruin. He confessed, his words spilling in broken pieces, that he was terrified of losing the one person who gave his life meaning. The woman listened without interruption. Her eyes didn't flicker with discomfort the way most strangers would. Instead, she nodded gently, tears glistening in her own eyes. And then she heard something that made Lucas freeze. "I know," she whispered. "I lost my son in a hospital like this. Different illness, different time. But the sound of machines and the smell of antiseptic, it never leaves you. My husband was alive then, but when he passed 2 years ago, the loneliness nearly swallowed me whole." Her words hung in the sterile air, heavy and raw. Lucas blinked at her, realizing he wasn't the only broken soul in that room. This wasn't just a polished woman from a privileged world, this was someone who had walked through fire, someone whose pain mirrored his own. Her name, he learned, was Maretta Vale. A widow, yes, but more than that, she was someone whose life had been built on wealth, business empires, foundations, and philanthropy. She was a billionaire in title, but in that hospital corridor, none of that mattered. She wasn't sitting beside him as a figure of power or status. She was sitting as a mother who had known loss, as a human being who saw another drowning in grief. Hours stretched like years. Doctors came and went with updates that only made Lucas's stomach twist harder. Evan was stable but critical, his body fighting hard against internal injuries. Lucas broke again and again, but every time he felt himself slipping, Maretta was there, quietly steady, reminding him to breathe. She even held his rough hand in her smooth one, unbothered by the grime and blood stains of his day. By daylight, when the gray sky outside began to brighten, Lucas realized something had shifted. He wasn't sitting alone anymore. And sometimes that was the difference between despair and survival. Days passed and Lucas stayed by Evan's bedside, refusing to leave. He talked to his son even when Evan was unconscious, telling him stories about their little apartment, the silly jokes they shared, the basketball hoop they had nailed above the garage door. Lucas prayed aloud, begged for strength, and every day Maretta returned. She brought coffee for him, real meals instead of vending machine snacks and blankets when the nights grew cold. She told Evan stories, too, whispering about gardens and travel, about a world waiting for him to wake up and explore. At first, Lucas resisted the help. Pride clawed at him, making him feel unworthy of such kindness. He was a construction worker drowning in overdue rent. She was a billionaire widow whose world couldn't be further from his. But Maretta's kindness was not about money. It was about presence, and slowly Lucas allowed himself to accept it. Then the moment came. On opened his eyes, weak and tired, but alive. Lucas wept openly at his bedside, pressing his forehead against his son's small hand, thanking God for another chance. And when he looked up, Maretta was standing there, too, her lips trembling in a quiet smile, her own tears falling freely. That single moment forever etched itself into Lucas's soul. On recovered slowly but steadily. Weeks later, when the boy was finally able to sit up and eat, Maretta visited one last time. She watched Lucas feed his son soup. Her heart warmed by the devotion in his every movement. Before she left, she rested her hand on Lucas's shoulder and said, "You don't realize this yet, but you've reminded me what it means to live again. Helping you being here brought back a piece of me I thought I'd lost forever." Lucas, overwhelmed, could only whisper his gratitude. He didn't have riches or grand gestures to give in return. All he had was sincerity. But Maretta smiled, telling him that sincerity was worth more than all the money in the world. They never labeled what they had. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something deeper at that moment. An unspoken bond between two souls who had carried unbearable losses and found comfort in each other's presence. Two lonely people who sat beside each other in an ER when the world felt cold. And sometimes that is the kind of story life writes when we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, comment your feelings, share it with someone who might need hope, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Every click helps spread love and kindness further than you can imagine. And before we end, I want to ask you something special. Please comment below with just one word that gives you strength when life feels too heavy. Your word might be the lifeline someone else needs today. Because in the end, kindness is not measured in money, power, or status. It is measured in moments like when a single dad breaks down in the ER and a billionaire widow sits beside him and says, "You don't have to carry this alone."